I think they're going to cautiously enter those waters and strike if it's there. It feels like Milwaukee's going to almost be forced to trade Giannis. We know at the deadline, like those 4 picks that the Warriors had available to trade were, talked about at the deadline. Considering the spot that they're in right now, Giannis's health history recently, would you want to put all 4 unprotected on the table right now? I don't know. I even think that's a conversation.
Plates, let's start with this. Since you were at all of the press conference stuff for the Warriors, come on, let us in on a little secret. They know, right? They know that the roster needs a lot of work, even though I know at moments they said otherwise, because it felt like there was some contradiction there. It's like, we want Kristaps back. We want Al Horford back. We need more people who can play every single game. What's the real on the inside, Slates?
There's a lot going on. I would say that, I think what you heard from Mike was a frustration that organizationally they had, that they felt even before the Jimmy injury, they weren't maximizing that version of the roster, right? Weren't they like 13 and 15 at one point? Obviously, you heard just the turnover stuff, dripping. It felt organizationally, and part of the conversations with Steve Kerr was like the need to be able to squeeze more wins out of the roster. They did feel the roster is better than it was showing. And then the injuries just cascaded and everything fell apart. And then there was easy excuses on why they won 37 games. But as Mike said in the press conference, and I've heard from several members of the organization, it is pretty inexcusable to win 37 games in a season where 1/3 of the league is trying to lose games, right? You remember some of those games late in the year where the opponents were like trying to shovel wins in the Warriors win column. So you have that. As far as, where the roster's at, I mean, we know it's not a championship level roster. You heard some of the flaws that, Steve pointed out that they feel like they need to correct on, but it's also this weird transition point that they're at, which I'm sure we're about to get into some of the more specifics of, which is like, you're not going to necessarily chase down the Spurs and Thunder right now, but you're also not going to hit the full eject button and trade Steph Curry. So it's a tough spot.
It's brutal, and especially when you start to think about who they still might bring back, and they need to be younger and more athletic and faster and all the rest of it. So when you start to think about this roster construction going forward, what really do you think they're going to go out there and target in terms of age of player?
You probably want a couple more mid-prime. That's been, I think, the problem the last few years. Like even, remember you trade Andrew Wiggins. It's like, man, you trade one of the guys that was like late 20s, mid to late 20s. And even some of the lottery picks you had picked that were supposed to be aging into that, Kuminga's the obvious name, are gone. So, you don't want to be loaded with 19-year-olds and 37-year-olds. So try to hit that sweet spot, but also probably use the pick. I mean, you could find a really good right away type player with upside at 11, particularly in this draft. And, maybe you, instead of using the mid-level on, a Melton type, you try to, take a swing on a younger guy with some upside. And, I think there's a lot of options, but there's also handcuffed in a lot of ways. They're in this like handcuffed era over the next couple of years.
I mean, Slace, what I'm hearing from you is that they're not actually big game hunting.
I think they're going to cautiously enter those waters and strike if it's there, and strike if a team, it feels like Milwaukee's going to almost be forced to trade Giannis. Yeah. But again, I would say I think that this is just my read on it. I think they're not first in line, not second or third in line, really, at this point, as far as packages that appeal most to Milwaukee. I mean, we know by deadline time, Miami's was the one that the Bucks seemed to be contemplating. Minnesota's was. There was a chance for the Warriors, I think, to really bump their package up, which would have been if they jumped into the top 4 of this draft. But then also, if you jumped into the top 4 of this draft, like, should you be looking to trade that pick? So that's kind of like this weird spot that they're in. Even let's say, so we know at the deadline, like those 4 picks that the Warriors had available to trade were, talked about at the deadline. Considering the spot that they're in right now, Giannis's health history recently, would those be would you want to put all 4 unprotected on the table right now? I don't know. I even think that's a conversation.
And Jimmy Butler would be obviously the big piece. If not, it would be Draymond Green in some sort of a sign and trade. What do you think their reluctance or willingness is to ship Jimmy Butler in his injured state?
Well, number one, if you're just talking like spreadsheet, cold-hearted, like pure value, it's like a pretty bad time to do it. Unless the team is just like, they would be much more interested in the attached assets. And again, those are attached assets that can become young players that are part of, a rebuild. So I don't know that it's more about like, are you sure you want to attach stuff to Jimmy Butler, or do you want to see if Jimmy Butler can come back in February and show, some Wolverine type recovery and look like the version that you saw prior to the injury, which was still, a fringe all-star level version. And then, maybe if he does, you do talk extension with him for a couple of years, or if he doesn't, then he expires and he's off the books and it's part of, a financial reset in the following summer. So I guess, again, if a can't miss Kawhi Leonard type deal is on their doorstep, I think that's something they certainly should and would take a look at. But I just don't think I don't sense a level of thirst that there maybe previously was. And I think you guys are kind of alluding to that fact that there doesn't feel like that much level of thirst from the Warriors as maybe there was in the last 18 months.
And let's maybe take that a step further. I don't know if you're making this direct line. Maybe they already knew this, but it felt like the NBA world saw Game 1 the other night, and they went, okay. Those two teams they're way, way better. So what do you think the Warriors are thinking about their offseason as they watch these two teams?
I mean, I think it's definitely a stark reality that hits you in the face that like, oh, the Spurs are rising this quickly. I think there was already that realization by the time the Thunder won the finals last year that they're this Goliath of depth. And the other thing people aren't even mentioning, like both those teams are loaded with picks too, right? Like the Thunder has 12 and 17 in this upcoming draft. The Spurs have a bunch of picks that they can use to go, supplement their rotation in the next couple of years. So it's not just like they're on a 2-3 year type run, but I also don't think you just pull the brakes on and just expect, hey, Spurs Thunder is going to be the Western Conference Finals for the next, 8 years. Like unforeseen things happen in the league. I mean, last year the Indiana Pacers made the finals out of the East when the entire year we were just saying it was going to be Celtics. Tatum blows the Achilles. Like stuff does change, but I do think what you're seeing in the West right now should make you be cautious about immediate win now, trade 2 picks because you got to get, your seventh man in your rotation needs to be upgraded because a seventh man in your rotation upgrade is not going to catch you up to those type of teams. So I'll give you an example. Like you probably don't want to make the Desmond Bane trade this summer, right? The 4 first-round picks to go get a guy that this solid fringe all-star because I don't think that leaps you up into the next category and then you kind of ruin your future. So that's probably how I would explain it.
Yeah, it's interesting because the other route they could go would be to try to, get Kawhi or get Giannis or bring in LeBron and some cockamamie, cheap sort of a deal. And I wonder if the Draymond contract isn't the thing that will get reworked in order to at least have some flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, look, a rework with Draymond, as I've reported, and from my understanding, it would have to help them get a piece that would win now. You're not going to give him a 3-year deal right now unless that frees up the mid-level exception and with that mid-level exception you're going to go get this X player that you think is going to be a real find or will really help next year. So also his $27 million if he opts in is a vehicle to potentially be traded, or it's just expiring. They can reset their books over the next several years. They're not as dire of future situation as it may seem for 2 reasons. Number one, they're not tied to any crazy money long term. And number 2, even if they are going to have this middle ground where they're an okay team over the next few years, the lottery rules are changing. And if you are the Chicago Bulls of the next couple of years and you're the 10th worst team, you're in that play-in bracket, you basically have the same odds that teams below you and above you have. I mean, they're flattening everything out. And now you need to get lucky in the lottery, but there's not necessarily as much appeal to just completely bottom out. So if they have their picks, which they do, and they are not tied to a ton of long-term money and they're an appealing destination long-term, I don't think they're in horrible situation. It's just you do look upwards in the conference and go, man, climbing to a title seems very unrealistic right now.
Slates, earlier in the conversation when I mentioned big game hunting, in your answer you used the phrase mid-prime, players in their mid-prime. Can you give us an example or two of some people who might be available in their mid-prime?
Yeah, look, like Trey Murphy's, we've talked about him plenty, right? He's a perfect, like, mid-prime type player with some upside. Maybe he can have a little bit more creation if given an opportunity. He's a floor spacer out to 28 feet. He's a wing who can guard several positions. But again, like, you know, the price for Trey Murphy has been gigantic because Trey Murphy has been viewed by the Pelicans, number one, they're just gripping on everything in New Orleans, number one, but also, two, they've thought, hey, if you really, really want this guy on a cost-controlled deal, he has a long-term cost-controlled deal, and if you think he's a finishing piece on a title team, give us 3 firsts or whatever, you know, like give us a huge haul. Now, I think the Warriors need to be cautious in the sense of like not giving out the huge haul, but if you can find yourself you know, those type of players, or like Atlanta is a good example, right? They went and they've smartly over the last couple of years, they got Dyson Daniels on a bargain. They gave Nickeil Alexander-Walker, like, you know, okay money last year. Like those two guys have exploded to a degree. You know, you got to find those type of guys with upside that, you know, maybe the full NBA world doesn't see yet as, you know, 3, 4, 5, you know, like the 3rd, 4th, 5th best player on a really good team, but they can become that.
Yeah, and hopefully they can become that with a team that gets progressively better over time. And I wonder if Brandon Podziemski will be a part of that. What are you hearing about a possible Pods extension as he becomes eligible this offseason?
I mean, those are September, October conversations, just historically. Extension talks, you know, off a rookie deal. That's just when that business typically gets done, unless you're just like an auto max guy, right? You know, you're Scotty Barnes, like the Raptors would say, here, you look, we know what we're going to do. But I think, you know, the Pods negotiations are going to be a little bit more, you know, they're going to be fighting over different dollars and cents and years and what does make sense. And the Warriors need a lot more answers about what their roster looks like now, where the money is going. So because of that, I don't even really expect those conversations to happen for a while. Just like, you know, the Steph Curry extension isn't even eligible until August. Like there's kind of a dominoes of the summer, and the Podziemski extension conversation to me is like several dominoes away.